In this video, we'll talk about the how and why of level blockout, and we'll also look at how the sculpting brushes work. Level blockout is the process of adding placeholder items to figure out the overall layout you want for the level. Blockout gives us a way of working general to specific so that we can make sure that the parts will work together well early on. And blockout really doesn't take very much time, and it speeds up the overall process of level design quite a bit by helping us to form a clear plan for the level early on. In this level, the blockout problem was very simple because it is just going to be a small sculpture park with 3 sculptures in it. And so I wanted to figure out how to situate the 3 sculptures so that they would be in an interesting place relative to each other and relative to the landscape. So when a viewer is in this VR experience, they'll start on this central platform, and then they'll be able to walk along some paths up and around the sculptural forms, and they'll be contained pretty much to this small area that you see here. And I haven't yet sculpted the sculptures, and so I have these spheres and ellipsoids put in here as just simple representations of what the size of the sculptures. And you can see that I put in these cubes down below. These are meant to act as placeholders for the concrete platforms that might support the sculptures. And it could be different in the end, but at least I've got a rough idea of how everything's going to come together. I also wanted to figure out in the blockout where the body of water would be. And actually, I skipped a part. Let me back up here. The way that I made this stuff was just by going to Place over on the Mode panel here, and then under Basic, I dragged a cube out by pressing R on the keyboard and then grabbing the center widget. We can scale this up. W lets us move it down. We can drag a sphere onto the top. Again, by pressing R, we can scale it to be larger. And W will let us move it. And then once we've got it to be about the right height, we can press End on the keyboard to drop that down to the platform. And then to make the body of water, I just dragged another cube in, and I just made it really large and moved it up and down in space until I was happy with the way that that water plane integrated with the topography of the landscape. One of the things you'll notice if I zoom up is that I haven't made any efforts to get rid of the seam where the water plane ends. And that's because if you go down to the height that the viewer will experience this project from, you really can't see those edges. And it's the same if you're over on that other platform. Those edges aren't visible. So I think it doesn't make sense to spend any effort even fixing a problem that you're never going to see in game. But anyhow, you might have a different situation where your edges do need to be fixed, or maybe you want to create your landscape from scratch or something like that. So let me show you how you can use the landscape sculpting brushes. And to get started with that, we can go over to the landscape panel on the top left and then click on Sculpt to open up the sculpting tools. And the first sculpting tool to be aware of is just the one that is called Sculpt. This is the most basic. And note that we can adjust the strength of the brush. We can adjust the brush size too to make it bigger or smaller. We can then, by holding down on the left mouse button and dragging across the landscape, we can build up material if we want to. Or by holding Shift and dragging, we can remove and push it down in space. We can go to Smooth, and the name of the brush is it implies pretty well what this one does. It just gets rid of any detail that you have there just by clicking and dragging. Another brush to be aware of is Flatten, and by default I think that Flatten will open in the both flatten mode. What that does is it lowers the high areas and raises the low areas. Now if you set this instead to lower, what that will do is it will knock down the highest areas to match the lower areas. So just depending on what you're doing, you might want to choose a different flatten mode. Another brush to be aware of is noise. So I think this one is really helpful for building larger kind of, whoa, that's way too strong. Let me set that down to 0.1, maybe even 0.01. I'll press Control Z a couple times to undo. Yeah, that's a very, very aggressive strength. Let me try 0.01. So then by clicking and dragging, we can build up a mountainous terrain. Let's try 0.025. So by using these brushes together, you can very quickly create some substantial changes to the landscape. I'd say as you're working on your landscape, just keep in mind that all parts of the landscape don't matter equally. Those parts that you will be able to see from the actual area that you'll contain the viewer are the parts to spend the most effort on.